And welcome to this second session of this workshop that aims at looking at the future. So, as we mentioned earlier with all the presentations, our sector is extremely challenging to document and to follow already. And what we see that there is a trend for renewable energy to go beyond power and to go toward transport and heating, for example. And maybe we should also follow other end-use sectors. If we start monitoring information by end-use sector, this is a completely different way to monitor information. And this is a completely different way to do what we are doing into the knowledge network. For this panel, we have a keynote speaker who is Adam Brown from the International Energy Agency, where he is a senior energy analyst. Adam is one of the usual suspects of the sector. He is the one that you will find into all the think tanks that make sense in this area, and he's the one that is able to bring ideas to the sector. There are not so many that are able to do that, and Adam is one of them. And I'm very glad to have you for this keynote introduction. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Nicholas, for those comments and for Irina for inviting me to come. What I'm going to try and do is go into a bit more detail, really, about the knowledge needs we have now and what we need in the future. So what I'll do is I'll go back really to one of the Paolo slides, which shows how we do our analysis for the market report. And then I'll look for the three sectors, how easy or difficult it is based on current information to do that, and what the main data gaps are. And then try and look forward a bit, because we know, or we think that we're going to see a big revolution in the way energy is produced and used. And some of these changes are not really yet captured in the way we collect our information and data. So you need to think a little bit ahead. What do you think these changes are going to be? And then start monitoring that now. And as you'll see, this is quite a complicated process to put that in place. I mean, just a comparison. If I get to the office in the morning and somebody says to me, how many lampposts did you go past on the way to the office? I'll say, I don't know. If before I go to the office somebody phones me up and says, when you get to the office, I want you to tell me how many lampposts you pass, as I go, I'll count the lampposts. It's a bit like that. We need to be in a position now where we were saying we need to start counting these lampposts, otherwise in 10 years' time we still won't have any idea how much of these new technologies are in the market. So we need to change the context. So I'll go back to this slide, which you've seen already. It was one of Paolo's slides, and we listed here some of the things that we consider when we're doing our market analysis: power sector trends, deployment patterns, policy framework, economic attractiveness and financing, and grid and system integration. And these are some of the main things we look at. You need to do this if you want to do market forecasting. You also need to do that, and actually in even more nitty-gritty detail, if you want to start doing policy analysis. If you want to say what's the best practice in terms of policy, or you want to look at different markets and say, why is renewables moving ahead in this market and not in that market? It's the same sort of information you need. Now, if we look at the electricity sector, you can see on the right-hand side, actually this is reasonably good, reasonably easy to do. The power sector is a very well-regulated sector. It has to be, or we'd all give ourselves electric shocks and so on. So it's a well-regulated sector. There's a flow of electricity, and the statistics and the regulations follow that. So that makes life easier. It makes it easier to follow what's happening in the sector. There is an established set of deployment data for this for this sector. If you look at the IEA statistics, you can actually see how much energy comes from different sources and how much electricity comes from different sources. It's not, of course, perfect. Some countries aren't perfectly covered. When you go to off-grid systems, that's not perfectly covered. But there is the basic data there. You can follow that. If you look at the policy framework, the policy framework can be understood. We have the joint database with IRENA, N21. The World Bank is developing and is just expanding this RISE system they have, which looks against some objective criteria at the policies in place in different countries. And then they're talking now about expanding that to cover 130 different countries. So there is information on this available. Of course, it's open to an interpretation and it's difficult to get this. One thing that you have to bear in mind is if you went back 10 years, information was relatively easy to get hold of because there were less countries had policies in place and the policies were relatively simple. We just put together a spreadsheet which covers all the data points for the feed-in tariff in Germany, all the different bands and all the changes. That spreadsheet has more than 9,000 cells in it. The UK, which has much less complicated, well-developed policies, even that spreadsheet has something like 4,500 data points in it. So if you want to do that for 193 countries, there's a huge amount of information and data. So you shouldn't underestimate, even if data is available, the issue of handling and managing and analysing that is a lot, but at least the information is there. When we come along to looking at economic attractiveness and financing, there is information, and we're helped in the renewable electricity sector. A lot of these technologies are actually globally traded. A big share of PV panels anywhere in the world, you can trace them back to China, so there is a common basis. But still, when you, as I think Paolo highlighted, when you want to do specific analysis, you really need to get regionally specific capital costs, regionally specific financing issues, and so on and so forth. And that data is quite hard to come by. The IRENA Costing Alliance is helping in that, but that's an area I think where you really, there's more work is needed to do that. And then on system integration, again, because it's a regulated system, you can get the information from the grid companies, from the regulators. Often there's a 5-year grid expansion plan or something you can find. So in many countries that information is available. Again, it's hard to analyse, but it is available. And if we go to the biofuel sector, that also is a very regulated sector. Conventional fuels follow a very well regulated flow, and actually the biofuels are blended into that, and it's quite well tracked. So if you look at the IEA statistics, you can see both the biofuels production and where it's used, you can track that down. It's pretty well handled. The difficulties in doing the analysis in the biofuels fuel are not so much the availability of knowledge, it's the uncertainties. It's the uncertainty around the policies. Are they going to be in place? Are people going to walk away from them? How worried are people about sustainability and so on and so forth? And monitoring and managing those changes is, you have to be on top of the game. But that's like a real uncertainty, not just a knowledge issue. And when you're looking forward and you're looking at the economics, you also have to not only look at the energy side, you also have to look at the feedstock side. And so you have to track not only what's happening to oil prices, but also what's happening to the feedstock prices. And here you can see on the top line here is what's happened to oil prices, and you can see just recently it's shot down. The bottom line is actually the corn price. And you see, compared with a sort of starting with 100, that's got to about the same place as oil prices, but the drop came much earlier. But when you're looking at the biofuels sector, you have to look at what's happening at feedstock prices as well as the fuel prices. And that, of course, adds a layer of complexity. And then the system integration, again, you can look at that as a regulated system. You can look at whether you're reaching the blending limits for the vehicle fuel stock. You can look at infrastructure constraints, so forth. So biofuels is a little more tricky because of the uncertainty and the feedstock side, but again, the basic information is available. Now, when we come to the heat sector, I've perhaps been a bit extreme just to demonstrate the case, but actually this is much, much more difficult. This, I think, is the real challenge of getting a handle on it. And maybe the difficulty in getting a handle on it is also of the thing behind the lack of attention given to the sector. It's just very difficult for people to get their head around. It's not a very well regulated sector. It's very diverse. There are many different potential fuels you can use, many different suppliers. It's highly diverse and disaggregated. It's actually much more hard to track than the electricity flow, and particularly when you talk about diffuse end-use technologies, it doesn't really get into things like the IEA statistics system. You have to have supplementary data to provide the information. What's happening in solar water heating, for example. It's harder to identify where the policies are. Very often they're at local or regional or city level policies rather than national policies, so that's more complicated. And when you come to try and do policy analysis and you try and find out about the regional differences in costs between the technologies, it's very, very difficult. Partly because the systems aren't globally traded to the same extent as, for example, the electricity systems. So if you go to one country and look at the next country and look at the system prices for solar water heating, you find they're really different, really different. I found, for example, you could get a biomass boiler made in Austria in the UK cheaper than you could buy it in Austria. But we don't really have a handle on that information. And then lastly, what actually happens to that energy after you make the heat or is not really tracked at all. And this is an issue with heat. It's a particular issue with cooling because cooling doesn't sort of get into the statistics at all. So heat is much more complicated, much more complicated. Just to illustrate the heat sector a bit more, we have, as Paolo showed you, we do track from the statistics what's happening in industry sector. Things are growing slowly, but that's mostly in the sectors that already use biomass for heat, like the paper and sectors like that. If you look at the building sector, that too is growing slowly, but the bulk of the heat used in that sector is actually in the so-called traditional biomass sector, where it's used for heating and particularly for cooking in developing countries. And we sort of almost pretend to track that. Anybody who really knows that sector knows that these numbers have a huge error bar in them, because often they're based on very old surveys of use of the material, and then they're extrapolated for that. And it's a very, very informal sector. It's very difficult to get a handle on that traditional biomass, yet it's a big chunk. It's a big chunk in the renewable heating sector. It's actually quite a big chunk in the global energy statistics, and actually we don't really know what that is. And that's a major effort, for example, in the Sustainable Energy for All initiative to highlight this as a problem and to think about what you can do to get a better handle on that. If you look at solar thermal heat, as Paolo said before, this is growing rapidly. It's particularly growing rapidly in China. So it's the most rapidly growing of the thermal heating sectors. But actually, this information can't be got just from the energy statistics. We have to rely on supplementary data to provide this information. For example, the IEA Solar Heating and Cooling Agreement is a good source of information about what's happening in terms of deployment of solar water heating, and then you have to back calculate from the capacity that's installed to get some feel for how much energy is produced. But the way in which that's done and the way that calculation is done in different places varies. It's not standardized. Heat pumps are a growing activity. The global heat pump capacity has doubled in the last 6 years. If you look at longer-term energy scenarios for heating, particularly in otherwise low-energy buildings which are highly insulated, they rely very heavily on heat pumps for the residual heat. If you look at the UK strategy for reducing its carbon footprint and so on and so forth, heat pumps play a very important role in that sector. Yet, heat pumps are a bit like solar water heating. They're not really captured in the IEA statistics or in energy statistics in whole, unless you have supplementary market-by-market information, which can be important. And then cooling. Cooling, the energy demand for cooling is rising and is expected to continue to rise. This is from the IEA ETP report. As you get increasing levels of urbanization and you get increasing income levels in those urban situations. So expect to see a huge growth in cooling energy demand, but again, that's not something that's easy to get just by looking at the statistics. So we've really got to think about how we get these new technologies, very dispersed technologies for heating, but also for electricity into the way we collect information. Now, there is a big effort to harmonize the way that energy information is collected. There are all these organizations listed on there who came together after a long period of debate, revised the definitions for renewables and waste and other things 5 years ago. That process is just about to start again, and I think that's an opportunity to try and start saying, actually, we really need to start monitoring and capturing these new energy sources that are going to come along. But this isn't something that can happen overnight. We can't just sit here today and think, oh yes, we should capture solar water heating in a more way. There needs to be an agreement by experts. It needs to go into this forum. And after that, then got to persuade people actually doing the statistical surveys in their countries to include it. And they're very reluctant to change. It's collecting statistics is an expensive, complicated thing. And if you say, please can you add 2 more lines to your survey, there's a lot of pushback on that. So we need to start now if we want in 5 or even 10 years' time to really start collecting these statistics. Now in general, the energy statistics that come out of this are pretty good. You can see here the sort of coverage of the number of countries. Now of course there's always scope to improve the coverage and the quality of the data. And there are a number of initiatives, IRENA and IEA and a number of other organizations, for example, are looking at how to improve the general energy statistics in Africa at the moment, and within that the renewables thing. But it's actually hard work, and of course for a small economy it's an expensive business to put in place people who can really follow these rather complicated data collection issues. And the other thing, of course, is that the way the statistics are being designed goes back to the way energy flows have always been and on the point of changing. So you start with primary energy supply, you look at how much of that finds its way into electricity, you find how much goes into the transport sector through secondary processing, and eventually you sort of almost by deducting what's left, you work out how much goes into heat. And to do that, you have to add in heat from different sources. Heat in the definition is really the commercial heat that's traded. So you have to take that which comes directly from fuels, you have to take some which comes from the secondary energy products, and then add that together. When you do that, actually, you're a little bit adding apples and oranges and pears, because some has a conversion efficiency already based in. Well, so this is a more complicated issue. And actually, this system doesn't recognize things which come from towards the total final energy consumption. It recognizes the way you get there. So it just sees if you have a lot of solar water heaters, and then all the system really sees is a reduction in the fuel use in that sector, unless you do something special about that. So these changes we're talking about are actually quite a fundamental change in the way we attack the whole information system. I've given you some examples, but you can see here some of the things which we need to get better information on. Off-grid solutions are not really captured very well at the moment. IRENA has been doing some work looking at that, how to categorize the off-grid solutions and how to find the information. I've talked about the distributed heat technologies. We expect to see a number of new transport fuels from advanced biofuels and so on and so forth coming through. It will be important to track those developments as well as conventional biofuels. And then the whole issue about application of electricity to new applications, to transport and so on and so forth, and how renewables can actually penetrate those. So I'm sure in discussion we can come up with a lot more issues, but they're some of the ones which immediately come to mind. So, some conclusions and something to start the discussion. I think that if you look at the electricity and transport sector, then actually you can actually generally track what's going on. If you really want to do analysis of what's happening in the markets, you need a lot more detailed information about costs and prices and so on. The heat sector is really challenging because of its disparate nature. If we want to really track what's going on in the new things which are coming along, then we need to be very clear about the definitions, about the various distributed electricity systems and heat generation systems, and think about how we can get the information to complement the normal statistics. And we need to think well ahead about the trends we see coming or might come, and start putting in place data collection and definitions and so forth now, if within 5 or even 10 years we're able to track these things.